In this video, we're going to be looking at revision cards. We're going to know when to use them, how to make them, and actually how to use them effectively to make sure we're actually learning the content we want to. So the first section will be looking at what a revision card is and when you would use them. So before we know what a revision card is, we need to have a think about the brain itself. Now the brain, when it's trying to build new knowledge in, or when it's trying to add to knowledge or just remember it, it tries to do a number of things. The first thing it tries to do is actually build on the stuff that it's already got. If you're building on something you already have, your brain is more likely to remember it. That's why a lot of times you'll learn things and you'll be like, oh, is this like that? And is this like that? That's your brain trying to patch these things together to make it easier. It also looks for nice, easy patterns, sort of reoccurring themes. You'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, this does this, then this goes to this. All right. It looks for meaning, so actually understanding it, like, understanding what's going on, why is it happening. It tries to condense. All right. The brain doesn't like masses of information. It wants short chunks. And similar to sort of patterns, it wants it in a logical order and it wants it to be organized. So discrete sections, logical patterns, that kind of thing. Now, if we consider that, then we can think, right, well, how does the revision card piece into that? So a revision card is essentially a group of linked information in one place. So a flashcard was just a simple singular fact or definition. This is more than that. It's a couple of ideas or explanations or processes on one card. And it's laid out in as simple a fashion as you can get, with very clear sections. Maybe a revision card will have, say, one big section with a sort of a flow chart on it, or it might have a table split into three, or a Venn diagram, or other such things. But it's often a very logically laid out thing. And you also on a revision card want to have questions to make sure you can allow yourself to test yourself on the information. Do you actually know what's on this card before you move on? So let's have a look at some examples. Right, this is a revision card on balanced and unbalanced forces. Okay, and you can see very clearly this revision card straight off the bat is split into two. Okay, we've got balanced on the left, unbalanced on the right. We've got a simple sentence describing each one, a picture with it linking it together and reinforcing it, and then you've got an explanation at the bottom talking about what happens. So you can see straight away there's a lot more detail here than there would be on a flashcard. Okay, there's lots of information linked together, diagrams, descriptions, and then the effects. And you'll notice each side is the mirror of each other, allowing you actually to compare and see how they compare to each other. So here's another one, very similar layout. This is a chemistry one, so comparing elements, compounds, and mixtures. Again, it's very clear to see that there are three distinct sections, each section with a description, followed by a picture, and then possibly examples. Now obviously on the mixtures one on the side, you can see actually there's a little bit of extra information here talking about alloys. All right, because it's slightly different. It's an extra piece that you need to know about mixtures, specific ones to do with metals. All right, but again, very logically laid out, not huge masses of information. All right, but the key bits are there. And again, the sort of pattern repeats for each one. Another one here, different layout. Again, this one is just a simple pie chart. Okay, there's still a lot of information on it, but the pie chart does allow you to sort of break that information up. If you just wrote this as a paragraph saying, 49% of background radiation is radon gas, 1% is this, it wouldn't be able to be stored in your brain as easily as this. Because when you come to remember this, chances are you'll picture the pie chart and you'll remember, oh, hang on a minute, there's one type of radiation that is actually almost half of it. What was it? And then you start piecing in the words and go, oh yeah, it was radon gas. Okay. And again, another one. This one, a bit of a flow chart. So this is a simplistic view of the life cycle of a star. Okay. Obviously, this student isn't focusing on huge amounts of detail. They purely wanted to make sure they could remember the actual sequence. So they've just worked their way down as a picture. All right, with very clear arrows and keywords labeling each phase. And here's the last one, again with a combination of text and pictures. We've got the fission of uranium, we've got pictures to help reinforce the content with it, and again at the bottom talking about chain reactions. So there's a few examples there at the bottom, but when would you use them? So you use these when you need to recall information in more detail than you would with a flashcard. As I said earlier, flashcards are for a fact or a definition. Revision cards are about clumps of information. Now remember that your brain stores information in these sorts of clumps. All right, schema is what we call them. This allows you to sort of collect the information together, store it together, and reinforce each other. Okay, whether that's a comparison of two things like balanced and unbalanced forces, or whether it's the process of a life cycle of a star. Okay, but it's the detail that we would use for revision cards. So now we know what revision cards are and when we would use them, let's have a look at how we actually make one. As you can see, making a revision card is a little bit more complicated than it is making a flashcard, which makes sense. There's a lot more information on a revision card than there is on a flashcard, so of course it's going to take a little bit more time to do it. And we want to make sure that we're actually laying this out in a way that makes it easy to remember and easy for our brain to digest. So the first thing you would do when you're making a revision card is simply pick out what group of information you want to put onto that revision card. It shouldn't be just a list of facts, right? It should be linked together. The second thing you're going to do is plan out how it works. Then once you've planned it and you've actually picked out what you want to put on it, you can make it. And the last step is to add the questions. So let's have a go at making one. Okay, so let's have a go at making a revision card then. So the first step of making a revision card is actually picking out the information that you want to learn and recall. Now, obviously, if you're going from a revision guide or your exercise book, this could be fairly challenging because you've got to collect the information that you think needs to be grouped together and put in, and then obviously condense it down. The nice thing is you will be given a knowledge organizer just like this one I have in front of me. Okay, now the knowledge organizer has already been grouped up for you by your teachers. So these people who understand this obviously incredibly well, and they have condensed and grouped it, making your life a hell of a lot easier. So when we want to group it, either A, we could just pick a section, so I could maybe just do the microscopes and turn this into a revision card, or I could just do this bit here. But you might also find that actually, do you know what, I might want to join these two here together. Right? If you know this really, really well, you might want to condense and put two into one, or possibly cells and specialized cells. You might have bigger revision cards. If you've got small revision cards, maybe you wouldn't have the room. Okay? So anyway, let's get straight down to it. I'm going to start by looking at this section here. I'm going to make a revision card on animal cells and plant cells. Now we need to plan how we're going to lay this information out. Because if this is a mess, if this is scattered and there's just bits everywhere and I couldn't quite fit it in, so I've crammed a sentence at the bottom and I couldn't fit the picture in, so it's a bit smudged and small, the whole process loses its impact. This has to be an incredibly clear card, the information needs to stand out, and it shouldn't be overwhelming. So we've got to take the time to plan this. Now the best way to do this is actually on a whiteboard. Now I don't have a whiteboard, so I'm simply going to plan it with a pencil on a blank revision card, and then I will go on to a proper one in a minute. So let's have a go. Put animal and plant cell, blah 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 at the top. Now we have a look at this, and I've got animal cell here, plant cell here. The pictures look really useful. I know that they're really good at reinforcing recall, so I definitely want to include those. So let's just start with that. I've got animal cell there, plant cell here. That in there, yeah, great. Okay, then I can start labeling it. Okay. See, at this point, I'm now starting to realise, well, actually, I've wasted all this space down here. So actually, it's probably good to move this over here, put that stuff there, and then to the right of this, I could include the extra parts of the plant cell, giving me a hell of a lot more room. Okay, I might even think, do you know what, I've got room, I could add something at the bottom. I don't know if I'm going to have space for that until I start adding the content in. But you can see how if you just started this and you went straight to this, it's very easy to start making mistakes. You're going to start having to fit a lot of information to a very small space. These bits of information here about the cell wall, if we have a look at it in here, there's quite a lot of information to condense there. I'm not going to fit that into that tiny box. And if I tried, this whole revision card would start looking really rubbish really quick. Alright, so planning your revision card properly is super important. And as I said earlier, best way to do it is to do it on a whiteboard. Okay, so now that we've finished our plan, I have basically turned that into a skeleton of the revision card that I want to make. So I've taken my plan and then just done it properly now in pen. So let's have a look at adding the information and really bulking this thing out. Now you'll notice that on the knowledge organizer, yes, it has been condensed, but sometimes you may find that actually I can condense this a little bit more, but be mindful that you don't want to condense too much. If you condense too much, you may leave out some of the key knowledge that you have to have. So try as best as you can to include as much scientific language as you can when you are doing this. So the first one that I'm going to do, I'm going to put in about the nucleus. So nucleus, and this controls the cell. That fits nicely there. The second one I've done is the cell membrane. Now what does the knowledge organizer say about this? It says it is a very thin bag. It keeps the cell together and controls what enters and leaves the cell. Okay, so let's put down cell membrane. Let's condense that to keeps cell together and controls what goes in and out. Lovely. And the last one, what have we got down here? The cytoplasm. Oh, this is a big one. This is a watery jelly. Most of the cell's activities happen here. This includes respiration, which happens in tiny jelly bean shaped structures called mitochondria. Okay. Cytoplasm. You can put most of the cell's activities happen here. E.g. respiration. Okay. So you can see I've kept a lot of the key knowledge in there, the key language is still in there, but I have shortened it a little bit because as we said before, we don't want this to be a massive information. If there's too much information here, your brain won't be able to digest it, and therefore you're less likely to be able to actually recall it. Okay, so here is our finished revision card. Right? Now, at this point, when you look at this revision card, it does seem quite filled. There's a lot of information, there's a lot to digest, and it becomes quite a difficult thing to memorize. There's a few things we could have done to make this a little better. I could have wrote the keywords in red or possibly underlined them. Personally though, I prefer to start highlighting. Alright, highlight my key language to make sure A, it breaks it up to see what information goes with each keyword, and also just to break the revision card up and make it a little easier on the eye. So first of all, I'm just going to highlight this side, so it's animal, and this side plant, and then I can highlight the keywords that go with cells, the key things that I've got to make sure that I can remember. Now instantly that looks a lot better. It makes it very clear now where the sections are, what the key things are, and then the information that goes with it. Now granted, I could have got, a little bit more in depth, I could have said, you know what, the nucleus is orange, and I'm going to highlight that little part of the cell that's orange in both, just to really highlight what those sections are. I could have done the cell membrane in pink and then given this a little bit of a pink highlight just to really make those sections stand out. The issue with that is of course there's 6 things here. So I'd end up with a lot of colour, and actually it would begin to lose its impact. That's something you have to be very careful of. If you overuse colour, things stop standing out because everything's standing out. Okay, so be mindful that you don't want to use it too much, right? Now the last part of making a revision card is actually adding on the questions so that we have a means to learn what is on this. Don't get me wrong, you could take a look, cover, write, check approach to this, right? You've done that a lot in primary school. With this, it may well be useful. The issue is with a lot of these cards, if there's for like this, lots of pictures or a pie chart or a flow diagram, it becomes very difficult to cover up certain sections of it. The only really decent way of doing it is to cover up the whole card, try and regurgitate everything, then compare it and check what you've missed. Okay? But then again, you just need to keep repeating that until you get the parts that you've missed. When actually it's nice to practice just the parts that you've missed rather than having to practice everything again and again and again by completely rewriting the revision card. So actually, a method that is very, very useful is actually to put some nice questions on the back of your card. For example, let's imagine when I've been learning this, I've been struggling to remember what cell membrane is. So I could simply write myself a little question saying, what is the role of the cell membrane? Flipping it over. Then I go, right, okay, go back to my notes in here. Don't try and do it from memory. Make sure you're using the key language. Keep cells together and controls what goes in and out. Okay, so I'm actually going to write the answer in red just to make life a little easier. Keeps cell together and controls what goes in and out. Brilliant. You know, you might also find that actually I'm struggling to remember which parts are in the plant, which parts are in the animal. So you could go with a nice question like, list the 3 parts of a plant cell that you do not find in an animal cell. And then underneath, you can simply write them down. Cell wall, chloroplast, and vacuole. Alright, so the nice thing, you can add questions to tailor the gaps in your knowledge. You might think, do you know what, I am going to try and regurgitate the whole lot, and then when you start finding those gaps, that could be the questions that you write on the back. Another great way of putting these questions in is you might find questions that you've done in class, on a worksheet, or on a homework, and you think, actually, do you know what, I keep making a mistake with that question, I've got to learn it. You stick it on your revision card. That way you can make sure that when you are revising this content that you are hitting that question again and again and again to make sure you've stored it in your long-term memory. Okay, so just a few key do's and don'ts then for our revision cards. Again, you'll notice these are fairly similar to the ones we did for flashcards. You've got to make sure that your notes are as brief as possible. Key points. We don't want lots and lots of waffle. Remember, your brain wants key small chunks, so let's give it exactly what it wants. Definitions need to be word for word. All right, they're definitions because in the exams and stuff, you're going to be expected to be able to regurgitate them word for word. So make sure on your revision cards they are word for word. Again, use color, but use it appropriately. If you overuse it, it becomes a mess and the color loses impact. Okay, but you want to make sure you are highlighting those really key things on there. Again, write all your information on one side, and then you can put your answers on the back to test yourself. Big don'ts. Don't make a note of everything. If you overwhelm your revision card and it becomes a wall of text, it will serve very little purpose. It's very hard for you to learn from, and you kind of lose the benefit of the whole process. Don't use your friends' notes or copy their versions of this. A revision card is, as we said, a group of information, but remember, you're grouping it for your brain. Your friend's brain and your brain will have different content in, and therefore you need to make your own. Sure, theirs may look nice, but if you build it yourself, it will have more impact because you're building it based on the scheme and the groups of information that you have in your head, and therefore it will be more beneficial to you. And going back to the color thing, don't color things in for the sake of it. All right, color in what's important, and that's it. Other things that are quite useful on your revision cards are mnemonics. So these are basically a way of turning a series of events or process with key stages into something that's far easier to remember, like a story. So a very common one is the stages of mitosis, so prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and cytokinesis. A lot of people remember this by the saying, pink monkeys are too cute. Okay, they can remember that saying. They picture a pink monkey and they go, right, PMATC, right, those are the first letters of the stages of mitosis. All right. A similar one for equations, very useful for equations, is you turn your equation into a little story. So for potential energy, you have mass times gravity times height, which easily turns into Mr. Griffiths hates PE. Easy to remember because he obviously doesn't. All right, so therefore, again, you're turning something that can be quite arbitrary and quite sort of hard to remember, really, into something that's very easy to remember because you're tying it to something you know very well. Okay, so now we understand what a revision card is and when we would use them. We've learned how to make them. Let's make sure we can use them. Okay, so how do we use our revision cards? Well, the first thing we want to do, just like our flashcards, we organize the revision cards into packs. Okay, the packs won't be as big as they were for flashcards because, of course, you've got more content on each card. So the packs will be much, much smaller. But, of course, on each card, you have far more questions. Once we've grouped them up into our different sort of packs, maybe a chemistry pack for paper one, or just the one knowledge organizer that you're learning, then of course we need to start going through them. So you go through each individual question, testing yourself on it. Do you get it right? Do you get it wrong? Okay. Put the revision cards that you got completely right in one pile and the ones that you got wrong in another pile. Then you're going to go back to the ones you got wrong, test yourself again. All right, so you're reinforcing the ones that you got wrong. Okay, giving your brain more chance to correct the knowledge it's got and practice retrieving it, making it far more likely that when you get back into class or an exam and you've got to repeat it under pressure, you've got it there. Then all you do, you keep going through the ones you got wrong until you've got them all right, and then you can put that down. Wait a week, and then you just repeat the whole process again. All right, so fairly straightforward, very similar, as I said, to what we've done with flashcards. Obviously, though, more time spent on each one. Now, I just want to make a quick note at this point to go over something that is a common error with students when they are learning from revision cards. There is a very big difference between recognition and recall. If you wrote an answer down and it's wrong, but you read the answer and go, oh, yeah, but I knew that, that isn't good enough. Okay, that is not recall. Okay, being able to recognize it is good, but that will not aid you in your ability to recall it. You have to practice recalling the information and not just recognizing it and looking at it afterwards and going, oh, yeah, that's what I meant. Because you don't get marks for that in an exam. You don't get to turn to the examiner and go, oh, that's what I meant. Right? What you write down has to be exactly what they've asked for. Okay, so you must practice recalling the information and not just recognizing it. Okay, so hopefully now we are aware as to what a revision card is. We have an idea of how we can make them, and we understand once we've made them what we are going to do with them to actually revise effectively. Okay, good luck revising.